Would you like to understand how the internet works? Here comes a crash course. Stick around. Hello. Today I'm going to be teaching you about the basics of how the internet works. I will try not to get too complicated, but there will be some new words that you might not know, and I'll provide additional resources for those words. So what I'll be talking about today, possibly some new vocabulary. Maybe you've heard the words, maybe you didn't know what the words meant, or maybe you do know. And I'll talk a little bit about the history of the internet. I won't get into too many specifics about that, more of a description of the evolution of the internet. How the internet works will be intertwined in that. And then in my next video, I'll make a quick troubleshooting of internet problems at home. And then talk about the assignment that my students would normally do. So moving forward, let's talk about how the internet works. So this is your house. Let's just pretend this is your house. Here's the attic. Here's the second floor and the first floor. And let's say this is the 1980s. You bought a computer. It's awesome. It sits there. Everybody uses it right there. You get another computer. You put that upstairs. And then you say, hey, you know what? I think it would be really, really cool if we could connect these two to share files. So maybe there are some games on this computer or some text files, and you want to share it with that computer. So what we would end up doing, you could do this now. We would do this wirelessly now normally, but what we would do is we could run a wire from that computer, right, through the wall or whatever, to that computer, all right? And when we run that wire and we get the two computers talking to each other, what we end up getting is something we call a network. Now, I think I'm typing. Yep, I am typing. All right, so what we get is called a network. And so a network is where you have two or more computers or devices connected to each other. Now, I'm sure there's a more formal definition of that. Feel free to comment below. But this is a network. All right. And so we could have, we could add a printer. We could add a couple other things, and we connect them to each other in our house, and we call it a network. All right. And so then what we said was, you know what? It would be really, really cool. I'm going to erase this word. It would be really, really cool if we were able to, I remember when I was younger, what we would end up having is we would have, here's my house, and maybe we have a couple computers in there. All right. And then across town, there was the library. So the library existed over here. And I remember something that I would use it for. I would say, hey, it would be really cool if I knew what all the books were in the library. And the library did have computers. And you could go on those computers and you could search the card catalog. Just like you do now, you can search and see what books there are. You could see where they were. Well, from home, they said, hey, it would be a really great idea if we could connect to that computer. So then what they did was they made it so instead of just using a wire connecting the two in your house, what they would do is they would say, okay, we have these phones in our house. We have these phones, okay? Pretend there's a phone connected to the house. And there's the phone line that can run all the way, and it already ran, from the telephone poles. And we could call the library with our phone. So then what we said was, hey, it would be pretty cool. Let's create these things. And they created these things called modems. And your computer could then talk to, sorry about that. Your computer could then connect to your phone line and be able to call somewhere like the library. And then what we'd end up being able to do is we could then connect from that phone line straight to the computer's computer and be able to search the card catalog. And we'd have to do that by entering the phone number. The one computer would call the other computer and it would connect, and it would make a network between all the way from your house to anywhere that your phone line could call. All right. So we used to have, like, if you wanted to talk to people, a bunch of people, you call a couple computers, and then people would also call those computers, and they'd be able to talk typing, maybe share some files. So it was pretty cool. So Then we started realizing, you know what? It would be great if we could connect to the library, but we could also connect somewhere else. So maybe instead of just the library, now I would also like to be able to connect to the local college. Okay, maybe I want to share some files with a computer at a local college. And so now, yes, I could call it. I would still be able to call. So I could definitely, use my phone and make a phone call to that. But we started realizing it would be nice to be able to be connected to multiple resources at the same time. So instead of a network, what we ended up having was we would, number one, end up having, at a university, let's say they'd have a bunch of computers. I'm only going to draw two just because of time. I don't want to waste your time. So they'd have a network set up. Maybe the computers at the library, they might have a network set up between all their computers, and they would have more than two computers typically. All right. So we have all these networks set up, and we used to go through the phone lines. And then we said, you know what, calling these exact spots, it's getting a little old. It would be nice to be able to connect to more than just one place. So here we have our university, here we have our library, here we have our house, and we want to be able to connect to multiple places. And so what we started getting was we would get something called an internet service provider. So for instance, that could be Xfinity, that would be Comcast. It could be I don't even, Net Zero, America Online. And so what we would end up having is we would have an internet service provider. So let me type that in. So here is an internet service provider, or ISP, internet service provider. And so what we would do, instead of calling all these individual places, and which made it really quite hard because you had to know all their numbers and all that stuff. So we would then instead, we'd be able to call our internet service provider, and the internet service provider would then, that service provider, we'd still call over the phone lines, but that service provider would be connected to not just one, but it would be connected to a bunch of networks. All right, so networks, remember, that's the connection of two or more computers, and the internet service provider ended up being able to connect to a bunch of different networks. So then I could call that internet service provider, and then that when I'm connected to the internet service provider, I could connect to any other network that they were connected to. So here's a good vocabulary word. So far we've talked about network. I'll change that color so we can see it. So we've talked about network, and that's two or more computers. When we connected multiple networks together, we could say that is, that is an interconnected network. So that's more than one network, so two or more networks connected together. And so an interconnected network would be the internet. And this is the internet that we use. Now, we have gone much faster than calling our internet service provider on the phone, right? Now we have Xfinity, I have Metronet. There are a lot of other service providers that what you're doing is you're not calling on the phone anymore. What you're doing is your computer is actually connecting through either coaxial cable, which is like the cable that comes to your house for cable TV, or it's connecting through fiber optic, which is actually light being sent through they look like almost like wires, but they're just glass. There are AT&T still sort of uses phone lines. So if you have AT&T internet, it's sort of like phone line, but it's called DSL, and it's a lot faster. So what we ended up getting was we had these networks, right? The thing was, originally, way back when, to connect to these different networks, it was a little confusing. Now, let me go back just to the house, okay? Let me go back just to the house. So we are, and maybe I'll duplicate this. So we're going back to the house. Nothing else exists. Let's see if I can easily do this. Nothing else exists, okay? It's just our house. So we're back to our house. All right. Now, I'm not saying we're going back in time, but I want you to have a better understanding of what I'm about to say. So here we have our house. If I wanted, let's say I wanted to connect to that computer, it would actually, I would be able to just connect to that, okay? But let's say we have multiple computers. Let's say there's a computer up here. We have another computer downstairs. We have a computer in the kids' room. It starts getting complicated trying to figure out how to connect to different computers. And so what we ended up doing was we would get a little box, which you probably have if you're on the internet right now. You would have a little box in your house, okay? And that little box was called a router. All right. So that router, what it would do is the routers would route, it would direct information to the correct spots. So right here we have our router, and every single computer on the network would be directly connected to the router. So instead of directly connecting to themselves, every single computer in your house, or wherever we're talking about, a college, a school, a library, they would all connect their computers to the router. And that's how your computers are now. They're probably wirelessly connected to the router. And that router is a box, probably, wherever your internet comes into your house. And so what we would do is, say we're on this computer and we want to access files on this computer, we would connect through the router and connect to that, okay? And the router would give each one of these an address. So very much like your street address, right? If you lived at 123 Main Street in hometown Illinois, United States, we could say, okay, it's in the United States, it's in Illinois. We could zoom in. We could say, oh, it's the town of hometown. Go into hometown. We could find Main Street and then find your address. And that's how we could find your exact where you live. Just like a phone number, right? What we used to have to do when I'd make a phone call before smartphones, when I had just the phone at home, if I had to call my mom or call my dad, I had to know their phone number, right? I had to enter their phone number and I would answer the phone, or they would answer the phone, hopefully. Now, something that we used to have to do, if I wanted to call, let's say, the movie theater to see when the movie times were before the internet, and I could look it up, I would have to open up the phone book and look up that phone number, because there's no way I could memorize those phone numbers, and I didn't have a smartphone to store those numbers in. So we had to look it up in a phone book, okay? What this router was doing was it was basically giving numbers for each one of these computers. And maybe you've seen a number that's similar, okay? Let me give you an example of a number that's decently similar to what you've seen. You might have seen numbers like this, especially if you've tried to play like computer games from one computer to another, maybe setting up your Xbox, setting up a network. You see these numbers, okay? Now, these numbers are called IP, that's Internet Protocol, I believe, addresses. And so what that means is each one of these computers would get a number, just like a phone number. So maybe this computer here, and I'll just copy this, maybe this computer over here, maybe it would be given 192.168.0.2. All right, so this one that's its number. And then the next computer might have .03. So here's .03. The next one is .04. I promise you I'm getting to the point where this will make sense while I'm talking about it. Let's say this is .05. And then we've got .06. Okay. And the router has its own as well. And it would have been .01 because it's the first one. Okay, so you got that. Okay, so then, and this is actually still how it works, if you want to connect to your router and change any settings, so maybe you want to change your Wi-Fi password or anything, you would enter the IP address of your router. You connect directly to your router, and you'd have to enter a password, a username and password, and you can change some settings. Then let's say if for instance, my wife has her computer on the main floor. It has some movies stored on it. And then I have a Chromecast. I have a Raspberry Pi, a miniature computer in my basement. And let's say I want to play the movie from her computer, but down on the Raspberry Pi. what I can do is I can enter this IP address 192.168.0.4. And then this Raspberry Pi, this miniature computer, could then connect through the router to her computer and access those files and play them just like those files are on this computer. And it's okay when you're just connecting in your house, you don't have that many devices. IP addresses, not a huge deal, okay? Remembering them can be a little annoying, but you can always just sort of look up your list in your router, and it wasn't a big deal. When it became a big deal was this. When you go and you start having a bunch of networks, and actually let's do this. I don't want to waste all that. Let's put that in here. So you've got a bunch of networks now set up throughout the world, and all of them have these IP addresses. Oh, that does not look nice. Let's ignore that. Okay. All of them have IP addresses. And in order for me to connect originally, a very long time ago, I would have to, if I wanted to connect to, let's say this was my local college. So let's say, let me copy this. Let's say I wanted to connect to, this is Wabansie Community College, and I wanted to connect to their servers. So this is Wabansie Community College. Well, what the internet service provider would do, it would give Wabansie Community College an IP address, okay? Now, it would be a little bit different than those 192.168. It would be maybe 168.76.54.17, okay? This was its IP address because it's connecting to millions of different computers, which we call servers, okay? Millions and millions of them. It's amazing. And there is no possible way that I could remember it. But originally, when the internet originally began, before America Online, what we would end up doing was, if I wanted to go to Wabansie Community College, I had to enter their IP address. And the way I found their IP address was I opened a book, very much like a phone book. I'd look up Wabansie Community College. I would find that IP address, and I would enter the IP address in the URL, the website bar at the top of maybe Internet Explorer. A lot like Chrome. There were no search engines, so you couldn't go to Google and just find it. So you had to enter those IP addresses. Now that might sound like some old guy talking to you about how things used to be. This is still how things are. Everything still runs off of IP addresses, okay? And so what ends up happening is, and let me show you an example on Windows. We can definitely do this. If I want to figure out, let's do this. I want to see what Google's IP addresses. If I say ping google.com, these are actually the IP addresses of Google, 216.58.192.164. So let me show you this, and hopefully this works. I sure hope it works. I'm going to copy this. So I just copied it. I'm going to open up a new window, and I'm going to paste it into there, and let's see where it brings me. It brings me to google.com. And so that is actually where, well, I won't get ahead of myself. So IP addresses were given to every single network connected on the internet, and they still are. And if you want to know your IP address, just go to whatismyip.com. Let me type that for you. Whatismyip.com. All right. So every single network connected to the internet service provider has an IP address, and it still does. And it got really, really overwhelming to have to look up the IP address of every single thing. So what we ended up doing was we came up with a digital IP address phone book. So instead of having to open up a book and read and find Wabansie Community College, what is the IP address, we came up with something, a digital form of that called a domain name server. And so what it would do is when I would enter, let's say Wabansie, I don't even know their website address, wabansiecommunitycollege.edu, it would connect to the domain name server, or a DNS, and it would look up, okay, what is wabansiecommunitycollege.edu? What IP address is it? Okay, and so for instance, maybe I would we'll pretend, well, maybe I would look up google.com. That would go to the domain name server, and the domain name server would send back to me its IP address. That's what the domain name server does, and that's what it still does on your computer. So it gives that IP address and it connects to it. And so now we don't have to remember those IP addresses. All right. Now, something with a domain name server. What this means is every single domain name, every single website you've gone to, your domain name server has been asked, where is this? So that means your domain name server has actually been tracking every single website you've ever gone to. Yeah. Yeah. So that's not necessarily a good thing. So you can actually change your domain name server to make it so it's not the company that you're paying for internet, because obviously we don't want to pay companies to sort of track our usage, because they will sell that information, which isn't, I don't know. I don't agree with it personally. You can have your own opinion about it. I really, really, really like opendns.com. You can go there and it shows you all the directions on how to change your domain name. If you're interested in seeing who is getting your information, you can go to DNS leak test, I think it's .com, and just search DNS leak test, and that'll show you exactly where your computer's connecting to get all the information. All right, so we've gone over what is a network. I'm going to write these words down. What a network is. We've talked about what the internet is. We talked about a domain name server. We've talked about internet protocol addresses or IP addresses. That's a lot of stuff that we've talked about. But this is how the internet works, and it's how it currently works. And hopefully that gives you a very basic understanding. If you felt that was a little complicated, please watch the video again and then check out my playlist, and I'll try to find some more resources that show you a little bit more about those specifics. But I would definitely suggest checking out DNS Leak Test. I think it's .com. Check out OpenDNS. I love OpenDNS.com. And actually, for parents out there, there's a cool family domain name server that you can enter. And what it does is it makes it so if someone searches for something that maybe you wouldn't want your kids to see, it actually will block it automatically for you. And it's a really, really nice resource to set up so you don't have to worry as much if someone's on the internet that you may not want being able to see everything. So very, very nice thing. And if you have any questions, please comment below. I know there was a lot. By the way, check out my Quizlet. It's going to be linked in the description below, and it'll go over all these words, and you'll be able to practice them and get a better understanding of what I was talking about. So have a wonderful day, everybody.